Good evening, everyone. It's November 25, 2012, and tonight we're talking about Microsoft versus Apple, the Surface versus the iPad, Android market share versus browser usage share, and the future of Apple services. This is the iMore Show. Joining me tonight is the editor-in-chief of The Loop, loopinsight.com, Jim Dalrymple. How are you, Jim?
I'm doing good. How are you, Rene?
Yeah, I'm a little ticked off. When we get Thanksgiving, the Americans get Columbus Day, and they get the day off. But when they get Thanksgiving, we get nothing.
Yeah. Well, I've been working down there for so long that my wife actually cooks Thanksgiving now on the U.S. Thanksgiving, so I do kind of get it too.
Oh, nice. And I guess because the nature of our business is very U.S.-centric, both of us have slower days on the Thursday and the Friday anyway.
Yeah. It's I get two Thanksgivings because she cooks for the Canadian one as well, so I can't really complain, you know.
No, that woman's got a hold on you now, Jim.
I know. I don't know.
So one thing I wanted to kind of tackle at the beginning is once in a while when you're on the show, Jim, we get accused of being fanboys or apologists for Apple. And I'm guessing that's because we talk about Apple in a way that displeases people who maybe don't like Apple or have a negative mindset towards Apple to begin with.
Why would people not like Apple? Do they not like products that work?
I don't understand. I don't know how you can not like a company. Like, I'm not always happy with the decisions that Google or Facebook make, but I don't hate Google or Facebook as companies. They're not people. They lack the agency for me to hate them.
Well, Google's evil. You have to hate them. Microsoft used to be evil, but they're too stupid to be evil now.
Are you saying Microsoft lacks the competence necessary to be evil?
I'm saying Microsoft lacks the competence to do anything.
We can get into that, but I have this theory, Jim, and tell me if this is right or wrong. I have a theory that when any company gets big enough, they're indistinguishable from evil, just because the things that they have to prioritize for their shareholders and their bottom line gets increasingly diverged from the needs of everybody. Maybe some people are really happy with them, but it's hard to make everybody happy all the time.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you can't make everybody happy, and I think part of the problem with what Microsoft is doing is I really don't believe that the people think Microsoft knows what they're doing anymore. You know what I mean? I mean, it's Microsoft has really screwed their users over for so long that I just don't think that they know anymore.
That's me making your phone buzz, Jim. I apologize. I'm busy tweeting out your name over and over again.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. There was this thing with Microsoft in the height of the Bill Gates era where they had a swagger. They were ballsy. They would go in and buy your company or ruin your company, take what they want. It was almost like the Wild West. And now under Ballmer, it's just it's more like Elmer Fudd and less like, you know, like a real Western.
Yeah, I can't get a handle on what Microsoft does sometimes because they let their executives go out and speak, and they sound like idiots. I mean, Ballmer sounds like a complete fool every time he opens his mouth, and you know, to say things like Apple is a small margin player whenever it ships a product, iPhone. iPad, you know, come on. You can't say things like that without people knowing that you're just full of crap. And he is. Now, there are things that he could have said that, you know, probably would have made more sense. Like, you know, our web browser is more popular than Apple's. Okay, well, that makes sense.
There are Windows keys on more keyboards than there are command keys.
Yeah, you know, he could have said a whole bunch of things, but to say things like that, it's just silly. So I don't pretend to understand a lot of the things that they do and say.
Well, it was
But
interesting. I mean, we had news, was it 2 weeks ago, that Steven Sinofsky, who was previously the head of Office and then the head of Windows and pretty much the czar of Windows, and some people thought the next CEO of Microsoft was kind of unceremoniously dumped on the right after Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 shipped.
yeah, that was a pretty big thing to have him go. I guess it was basically like having Forrestal go, but the part of Sinofsky is that it sounded a whole lot like he was trying to make a play for CEO, and he was making waves throughout the whole company, and Ballmer finally get fed up and get rid of him. But man, that's a big move. But I don't know that Windows has really done a whole lot in the past few years. I mean, Windows 7 wasn't bad.
Yeah, it was better than Vista.
It was, but they put out Vista, and then everybody seems to forget that they did put out a lot of these like Windows Me and Windows.
Yep.
People talk about XP and Vista and 7, and then Windows 8. Windows 7 wasn't bad. I said from the time I started using that it was definitely a big improvement, and more where I expected Windows to go from XP instead of where they did go with Vista. And
it was like a course correction.
Yeah, and it was a good course correction, I think. Now Windows 8, I don't get.
I think what shocked me about Sinofsky is that you could almost see, like, you couldn't really see Forrestal, but in hindsight, there were these stories that went out about him arguing with Johnny Ive and about him being difficult. It was almost like there was more pageantry surrounding it, where Sinofsky was kind of, you woke up one day and he was gone.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like Microsoft hasn't done good Windows versions in the past decade. They have. XP is still a staple of a lot of people, for a lot of people and businesses too. And Windows 7, I think, is the same thing. But there's been enough in between that I think people are shying away from these automatic upgrades that Microsoft kind of counts on.
Yeah,
and when you have an operating system, and every computer company is going to start putting it out there, but nobody wants it. That's a pretty big problem that you have on your hands. And there's been studies and there's been reviews on Windows 8, and they're not all that good. There are some people that like it. There are more people that just find it confusing.
What interests me about what you just said is that there's been this school of thinking for a while now that personal computers are pretty much good enough. If you just want to browse the web and you just want to check your email, you could still be doing that on XP, and the impetus to upgrade is not as much. Yet Microsoft derives almost all of their profit from software. Apple with iOS devices can just give away upgrades. They gave away Mountain Lion incredibly cheaply because, again, their profits aren't tied to software. And now we're seeing Microsoft moving to more of a device-oriented system. And I wonder if that's maybe them realizing that those incredibly lucrative software profits aren't the same as they used to be.
Well, I mean, Microsoft used to rely on licenses. They would get businesses to upgrade all their licenses and buy new versions of Windows and things like that. And then, you see companies like Apple would come out with their server versions and offer free licenses and free additional and all this kind of stuff. And Microsoft would make you pay for things inside of their services where Apple didn't. And, and of course you have Linux and Apache and,
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of things that you don't need Windows for. And now you don't even need Apache for. I mean, when you have products like Nginx and things like that make run even faster. So.
Because now, if you remember that famous All Things D thing when Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were up on stage together, and Steve Jobs did that Alan Kay saying about people who are really serious about software want to make their own hardware, and Bill Gates said, well, we don't really agree about that. And then came, the Xboxes and came the Zunes. And now we have rumors, we have the Slate, the Surface, and we have rumors of a Surface phone.
Yeah. And, it's funny to see what Microsoft is doing, because they have alluded to the fact that they're going to come out with more hardware products, but they continually ridiculed Apple for making the hardware and the software. But if Microsoft believes that the companies that are making the products that Windows is going on doesn't reflect what Microsoft believes the product should be, then they definitely should make their own hardware. But I believe now Sanofsky was the guy who argued that the operating systems had to be one. The mobile and the desktop had to be one operating system. And Apple went totally the opposite way and said that they had to be two. And I agree with that. And not just because of this, but imagine you get a tablet, a 32 gigabyte tablet, and half of it is taken up with the operating system. You only have like 16 gigs left.
And there's a bunch taken up by Office, which is sitting on there's two operating systems, right? You have Windows sitting on top with Windows RT sitting on top of it, and then Office on the lower level.
It's just terrible. And then, the reviews that I've read of the Surface have not been good. The majority of them are, and what did MG Siegler call it? Clunky and...
Yeah, he basically called it a steaming pile of shit. That was, I think, the essence of his review.
Yeah, I mean, when he first came out and said, I understand now why they didn't want me to review it, basically because it's a piece of crap.
And some people would dismiss MG and say, oh, he's a resident TechCrunch fanboy, the same way, that there's negative connotations when we do a podcast. But he makes a good point that if he gives bad reviews, people will stop trusting him. So it's not in his best interest to lie about products on the scale of Microsoft Surface.
Well, it's not in our best interest either. But,
Absolutely.
we'll still put in those complaints. It's in our best interest to be honest about whatever product. And, I am in the reviews that I do. And what's interesting is that if you read the reviews that come out about an Apple product, I don't have access to Walt's review, or I don't have access to anybody else's review. But when I put mine up, when the embargo lifts, the good points are basically the same. The bad points are basically the same. So there has to be some level of honesty there on the reviewers' parts in order to pick out some things that are good and bad.
There's a consistency if you look at all the major reviews that come out when a new Apple product launches, there's a consistency of them. There might be certain points that some people find more annoying, less annoying than others, but in general, there's a consensus. And the Surface was almost as bifurcated as the product itself. There are some people, because of Microsoft's line, I think this was almost as stupid as Nokia's beta smartphone campaign. Their line was no compromises. And then people get a device that is essentially at its nature incredibly compromised and puts every choice onto the user. There's no opinion in the Surface. It's just, well, you can have this or that. You can have this cover or the $10 more expensive cover. You can have Windows RT or real Windows. You can use Internet Explorer in Windows RT or in real. There's just so much conflict within the OS.
It's kind of funny, isn't it? And then when you use it and it's not really optimized for touch, I don't understand that. How can you release a touch product but not release software that's optimized for touch? It has a touch layer, but that's not the same thing.
That was MG's point, where it kept asking him to install stuff that he couldn't install, and he kept trying to press the yes button and it wouldn't work. And he said, that is our future.
Yeah. Well, that's the future for people that buy the Surface. What's going to happen now that Sanofsky's gone? Are they going to revert back to two OSs? Are they going to have a mobile OS? I don't understand how a company could release a product that takes 16 gigs to install on a mobile device. because it has to churn through that stuff too.
And this is also the first version. The second version of the Surface isn't being released along with the first version. It's being released in January or February, running full-on Windows, running an x86 processor with fans in the tablet, which again, to me, is a sign that you're not making the dictator decisions that you as the head of a company should be making.
Yeah. I mean, you can't do that. You just can't. And, Mike Rose said in the chat room, and it's very true, Windows RT itself is a fascinating set of compromises. But the whole system is supposed to be no compromises.
Yeah.
And that's where it's almost funny, but it's not funny.
It's interesting because when you look at the iPad, for example, and the choices Apple made, and some people might say, I wish the iPad was more like a computer. A lot of people said, I wish it ran OS X. But when you see full-on Windows running on a tablet and you have to start dealing with those interface elements, it starts to make sense, the decisions that Apple made with the iPad.
Well, if Apple came out tomorrow with a tablet that ran a full version of OS X, I don't think I would like that. I really don't, because you'd have to ask yourself, why? What do I want to do in a tablet that I can't do right now?
Yeah. And if your answer is run Photoshop, then try the Photoshop that exists on the tablet now and imagine that being worse.
Yeah, I can't see that. Sebastian said the ModBook Pro.
Yeah.
There are things that allow you to do some of the stuff, but in my mind, those were products that are back in the old Microsoft tablet days. When Microsoft released a tablet, it would be basically a computer that you have a pen, and you write on and you tap, and it was kind of like a big palm.
Mm-hmm.
And, they never caught on. But the iPad did. So the iPad is clearly the winner in that. I mean, Microsoft's old tablet style had a decade to try and get traction. And I don't think it ever did.
Logan Westerman in the chat room says he wished he had a USB slot. And those are the kind of things you hear a lot. And I think about this stuff, and I understand the desire to have a USB. To me, that's the same as wishing you had a floppy drive on the Mac. But Apple is betting that these sorts of technologies are at the end of their lifespan. They're not at the beginning, and that things like Dropbox or iCloud basically make them redundant, and they would rather push the design forward than keep supporting. Like, we've seen those MacBook Air clones with VGA ports. I mean, there's a certain level of ludicrousness that comes up with them.
Well, I look at what I use my iPad for, and as soon as the iPad was released, what was it, 4 years ago, there was some talk about, well, it needs a USB slot, and it needs this, and it needs that, and okay, there could be things that it needs, but then I wonder, what would I use a USB slot for? What could I put on there that I would need USB?
Yeah.
And okay, files. Well, I use iCloud or Dropbox or stuff like that for files. So I don't need that. I have access to all my files wherever I go. So it's not files. Is it peripherals? Well, I don't really need a mouse because a touch device is all about touch. If the applications are written like they should be, then the touch is all you need. I mean, I don't pick up my iPad and said, oh, I really wish I had a mouse right now. It just doesn't happen. So I don't know what I would need that USB port for.
Logan also mentions HDMI on the Retina MacBooks, and Apple kind of caved on that with the Mac Minis and the MacBook Pros. I've never used mine, and I don't have a need for it. Using AirPlay, I'm fine.
Well, and see, that's the other thing. If you have technologies that are going to supersede some of these older ones, and again, HDMI. I have HDMI on my MacBook Pros. I never use it.
Yeah.
AirPlay, yeah, I use that. But even more, I just use my Apple TV. It's got HDMI and it plugs right into my TV, and I sit back with my remote. As a matter of fact, I was using my Apple TV just before I came down. I bought the Led Zeppelin concert, the
Nice.
new one that they released, and I was watching that. And that's what it's all about. It's not, to me, about, plugging in my HDMI for I don't know, watch a show on it or go to my TV. Maybe HDMI if you're at a presentation or you're doing something like that. Sure, that may work, but for my use, I don't need that.
Jason is saying that people who do video work might like the ability to run HDMI out to monitors so they can do their video editing, which
Yeah, and that could be the perfect example of why you would want HDMI. But it's I go into every review, and I say this at the start of every review. This is how I use my device. And I go through and do a review based on how I use it. Now, I'm not a video editor, so I don't miss not being able to punch out HDMI because I don't care. I watch the end result video, and as long as I can do that, I'm happy.
and you could argue Thunderbolt could probably pass through HDMI anyway, and Apple is better suited with putting more Thunderbolt ports on.
Yeah, I don't mind having the option on my MacBook Pros to have HDMI and USB. What do I plug in USB on my Mac? Mostly audio interfaces.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, that's what I do. Otherwise, I don't use it. I mean, my computer. Oh, well, I plug in my iPhone to charge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other than that, and the only reason I don't use a charger is because the computer is there, and it's just easy just to plug the cable in and plug my iPhone in. My iPad Mini, it holds a charge for so long that is even rarely that I have to plug that in.
And it's conceivable in the future when a wireless charging standard, whether it's Qi or whether it's PowerMat or PMA, those legacy connections will also, they'll be there for emergencies, but every time we go into a restaurant and put our phone down, it'll be charging.
Yeah, and there's no telling where the technology is going to go. And here's part of the problem that I see with the way that Microsoft was doing a lot of its tablets and even some of the computers. They had to make sure that there was COM ports and there was parallel printer ports and there was all this stuff and USB ports. And I think that Apple kind of took the opposite approach and said, we don't want any of that. This is going to be something, an iPad, this is going to be something that you can just take with you and work on because all the apps are going to be built specifically for this. And Microsoft went and said, well, you're going to want to be able to have a parallel port so you can plug in. And, you're going to want to have a COM port in case you want to communicate. And you're going
a PS2 plug for your old mouse from your Peanut.
Yeah. I don't see that. I don't see the advantage of that. The advantage of, having the iPad the way that it is its portability.
I think also people who are technologists tend to like we will buy the new iPad, we'll buy the new MacBook, we are moving forward. And Apple's really relentless about throwing things out and doing the new thing, where Microsoft has always been more about legacy support and the Wintel, even the Intel chips they use, I think, can support back to DOS. And it was a much more comfortable environment for people who maybe kept their computer for 8 years or never upgraded their computer or still had that disk version of Word that they loved so much.
Yeah, and I'm in favor, and I tell developers this all the time, I'm in favor of moving on.
Yeah.
If you have to cut off at the last version of the OS in order to make a better application, then do it. And same with Apple. If you have to cut off the support for, machines beyond this date, then go for it.
Which is kind of ironic now because Apple is maintaining backwards compatibility for iOS down to the iPhone 3GS, which launched in 2009. I mean, you don't have all the features, but you're binary compatible. If a developer releases an iOS 6 only app, you can run that app. Where Microsoft, who's always been incredibly backwards compatible, broke compatibility for Windows Phone 6.5, broke it again for Windows Phone 7. And now Windows Phone 8 is an entirely new thing again. So they're, again, doing a non-Microsoft strategy in mobile.
Well, you know, what Motorola said that they would be able to upgrade to the newest version of Android. Mm-hmm. Then they said, "Oh no, you can't." I mean, Microsoft with its Windows Phone 7, even the latest Nokias, or not the latest ones that just came out, but the ones before that,
like the 900.
Yeah, the 900. They said that those would be upgradable as well. Well, no, they're not.
Yeah.
So, but I have no issue at all if Microsoft came out and said, we're not supporting anything beyond this phone. And if that's the newest phone, then great. But don't lie and come out and say, oh, yeah, these will be upgradable. Yeah.
Well, they promised an intro, and they promised Windows Phone 7.8, which would give you the new home tile experience. And even Paul Thoreau, of all people, is sitting there going, dude, it's been months. What the hell?
Yeah. I mean, same with Motorola. And Motorola was forced to send out upgrades, almost money, wasn't it? Didn't they get money? People that bought those phone money or coupons?
I don't remember. I remember people having to mail their Zunes in to get LTE cards put into them and serial port update. Sorry, USB port updates and stuff.
No, this was just recently that this happened with the Motorola phones. You would think that they would know better, but and somebody was mentioning a little while ago that Microsoft or that Google is coming out with an open source competitor to AirPlay, or an open source copy of what Apple did. So that should be fun to watch too.
Well, that's one of the things that, I'm not surprised by those moves, because any company will tend to, what makes them money, they will keep proprietary, and what makes their competitors money, they'll try to fracture by open sourcing it. Like Google does not open source AdSense. They do not open source their search algorithms like PageRank. All of that stuff is incredibly proprietary, but stuff that Apple is doing well, of course they're going to open source. I mean, Apple has WebKit open sourced. That's a corporate strategy to me. So it's kind of interesting with the reactions we get to all this stuff.
Yeah, it's you brought up an amazingly great point there, and it's funny that, and I don't mind that. I don't mind that that Google is looking to open source something like AirPlay, because it's not like Apple's going to sell it to anybody.
Yeah.
It's Apple. So it's no surprise that Google is going to try and release something to bite into what Apple's doing. But yeah, Google keeps talking about how wonderful they are and that they're open source and that they're doing wonderful things for humankind. And okay, well then open source the search algorithm.
The thing that interested me today was that we see these stories over and over again about how Android is a sum total. All Android devices outsell the iPhone when it comes to phones. All Android phones together outsell all iPhones together. But over and over again, we see usage statistics that say that people with iPhones, for example, use the web way more than Android users do. People with iPads obliteratingly more, 80 some odd %. And I was trying to figure that out today, Jim. And I don't know if you have an opinion on it, but is it just that people on Android buy it as a feature phone and they don't care about web browsing? Because Chrome seems pretty discoverable and pretty usable to me. I don't understand the disparity between market share and actual usage share.
Yeah, and that is it is a very interesting thing. I mean, to get back to one of your first points, Android phones are not selling.
Yeah, that's true.
Samsung
phones, yes.
But Android is not selling. I mean, I think that's a pretty popular belief, and I think based on the numbers, that would be proven if Samsung would ever release numbers, but they don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, Samsung has a great business. in selling Android phones, and good for them. You know, they're bringing competition in, and they're, besides the fact that they stole a lot of it. Once they pay their $1 billion fine, then it'd be good to go.
They had an early jump start in R&D.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. Right from Cupertino. But you know, they do have some interesting features, like that that thing where you put two phones together.
Yeah,
and
the beam.
yeah, it transfers video and stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't used that, so I don't know. It looks very cool on the commercials. If that works like it says it does on the commercials, then you know, kudos. That's a great feature.
It reminds me of the infrared beaming from the Palm days.
My God, but that was so terrible.
I know.
It? That was just, that was horrendous. Man, that made you want to just scratch your eyes out.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, does Android outsell iOS? Well, typically what analysts say is that Android is outselling the iPhone.
Yes.
Now you're comparing a software product to a hardware product.
Yes.
You can't do that. So the proper way to do it is Android outsells iOS, but it doesn't. Once you put iPads and iPod Touches in there, then it's no longer outselling iOS. So now you want to do just smartphones? Okay, then pick a company.
Yeah, they don't do that. They say phones running Android outsell phones running iOS. And there's only one phone. Well, there's one category of phones running iOS.
Right. So, you know, I mean, you can phrase it and you know, people do that for Apple as well.
Media tablets, remember that? Media tablets versus PCs.
Media tablets, yeah. So, you know, that's one thing that people have to realize, is that these numbers can be made to mean so many different things, and it can be the same numbers. But a lot of times, these analyst firms are hired by the companies to do these studies.
I don't know if you remember the one that came out 2 weeks ago where it said that Samsung was outselling, the Galaxy 3S was outselling the iPhone. And it said that in the title of the press release, and then in the first paragraph of the press release. But when it actually quoted the analyst, it said outshipping.
Yeah. And they didn't include the iPhone 5.
Yes.
They only included the 4S.
And they included, and I know this is not really fair on my part, but the Galaxy S3 is not one phone. It's built on different architectures. It's as different as different models of iPhones, but they were only counting the iPhone 4S. One has a quad-core chip, one has a dual-core chip, different completely different platforms, but the same name. So if Apple just used the same name, that would be fine too.
And Michelle just brought up a good point. Samsung brings out what, 3 or 4 phones a month? I mean, that's the thing. If you buy one of these phones, and everybody has been part of this, you know, you go out and you buy a phone, and all of a sudden you realize, hey, wait, they just released a new phone. I just got this one. You know, for years we've been going through that. So, you know, I mean, you can't. I think what a lot of these companies do, like Samsung, is just release as many phones as they see being popular. I mean, they released the Galaxy Note, and, you know, by all accounts, it's selling very well, but they don't need that to be the blockbuster sale. Yes. What they need is for every product to sell a little bit. And then they can say, well, we sold, you know, however many million. And it could very well be that Samsung is outselling the iPhone. Mm-hmm. It could be. We don't know, because Samsung won't release the numbers.
Yeah, we have analyst guesses, which should not be confused with product numbers.
That's exactly right. Analysts will come out and say, Samsung sold 30 million devices this quarter. Well, analysts don't know that, because anybody can go back and look at the Samsung press releases and see that they don't release any numbers. Apple release every quarter. They tell you how many sales of the iPhone that they have.
And they're incredibly conservative about it. Like if that phone is on a truck and has not reached a customer, they will not count it if it's not by that date.
That's not Apple's numbers are not shipping numbers, and that's something else that people have to remember. They're not shipping; those are sold numbers. So in Samsung's case, you have a situation where they don't release shipping numbers, sold numbers, no numbers. Analysts guess, and reporters take that number and say, "Well, this is what Samsung sold compared to Apple, only sold 20 million." So Apple or Samsung sold 10 million more, but those could be shipped. They could be sold. We don't know.
And the funnier thing was that they said the iPhone 4S, and Apple does not break down by model either. So they are guessing the number of iPhone 4S as well.
And, RIM is a big one for doing this. At least RIM will give you a number, but RIM will say that they shipped 10 million BlackBerries this quarter. But the problem with that is that shipped could mean that it's anywhere from the factory, on a truck, in a store, in a warehouse. They could be in the back of someone's car, delivering them to a store. You don't know. As long as it's out of the factory, it's shipped, and they'll count it.
Which sometimes people call channel stuffing.
Yeah. And that's kind of... that's dirty pool in my mind. I want to know, as a reporter, I want to know how many did you actually sell?
Yeah.
That's what I want to know so that I can compare it. If Samsung is actually selling more than what Apple is, I'll report that. And
Absolutely.
Samsung is selling more than what Apple is. I could care less. I don't have a vested interest in Apple. Where I get upset is when people say, well, Samsung outsold Apple. Well, no. How do you know that? I just, you don't know that.
So getting back to the stats though, so let's just assume that maybe they're roundabout. There should still be a lot of Android phones and tablets more phones and tablets, but I'm still not sure why people aren't using them, why they aren't browsing the web with them. Just the statistics, and when you look at usage rather than sales numbers, it skews massively back to Apple every time. Yeah,
and that's kind of funny, isn't it? But it does skew back to Apple. And what else skews back to Apple? The amount of money being spent on apps.
Well, profit in general, Apple's profit share of the market is staggering.
Yeah, that too. But why is it that people that buy iPads and iPhones spend more money on apps and control a bigger portion of the browsing market? Mm-hmm. And it's because it's easier to use, or are people using Android tablets for reading books or doing other things besides what people with an iPad are doing?
Or are they buying, and this was one of my only guesses, was that a lot of people go in with their Nokia or Samsung candy bar and are given a good deal on an Android phone, and for them it's just the next feature phone, and half the little icons on that screen never get tapped.
Yeah, well, they can't get tapped because the usage stats show. Mm-hmm. So here you have Android with a big portion of the market, but when you dig down in the market, they're not actually doing anything with it. So are they just feature phones to those people, as you said? I mean, it's a really good point, and I wish that we knew what the people were doing. I have no problem going into the App Store and paying somebody for an app, and I actually did it. Well, I do it all the time, but I did it today. I bought AI Writer on the Mac.
Nice.
So that I could try out the live preview of Markdown, because unlike a lot of people that started using Markdown years ago, I did. And over the past year, I've started using Markdown exclusively. So I wanted something to be able to preview it. And I bought AI Writer, and it was great. And people were saying, yes, that or Byword.
Yeah.
So today I bought Byword because it has the multi-markdown for Markdown. So I bought that. It's great too. I have no problem going in and paying somebody, $10 or whatever those apps cost to do that. I do it on my iPhone too. It's it's convenience. It's having that stuff there.
It's so easy to do.
Yeah, and you know, I did it this afternoon on my Apple TV. I saw the Led Zeppelin concert. Buy.
Yes.
You know, $15. Buy.
Yeah.
I couldn't hit that button fast enough. Buy. I want to watch it now.
I even went into the Apple retail store because the Americas had it for a while, but Canada just got the pay with your iPhone at the Apple store functionality. And I went in, scanned my Lightning adapters, put in my iTunes password, and, checked over my shoulder to make sure I wasn't going to get tackled on the way out, and walked right out the store. Super simple.
I mean, that's what convenience and for me, excuse me, I know a lot of people talk about the audio quality and video quality, and that it could be better. But for me, I don't really notice that much of a difference, and I probably should, considering I record music and everything. I notice if it's really bad.
Yeah.
There are some MP3s that I have that are really old that are just terrible, but they were ripped in a really low format and everything else. But when you start getting up to like 256 and stuff like that, I can't notice the difference. And I want the convenience of being able to, like this afternoon, of seeing the Led Zeppelin movie and watching it within seconds of seeing it.
Or hearing a song on a TV show that you like, scanning it with Shazam or something and immediately buying it.
And you know what? My wife and I did that the other day. We were driving in the car, and it was an old Crosby, Stills, Nash song. And I said, I can't remember the name of this. What's the name of it? And I said, Shazam it. So we did. Pulled it out. Boom, there it was. Turns out I already owned it, but I wanted to make sure because I really love the song. But I've been buying music and media, movies, videos, everything, for a decade from iTunes. And for me, it's more convenience than anything else. Would I rather go? The option is this afternoon, sit down and actually watch a 2-hour Led Zeppelin concert that I was very excited about. It's in HD. It looked beautiful on my TV. Or hop in the car, go to a store, if I could find one that had it, buy it, come back home. By that time, I was almost done the movie.
I saw a sale on Amazon that was cheaper than iTunes, and I realized I'd have to order it, make sure I'm home when they want to deliver it, or have to go to the postal station to get it. And I just bought it on iTunes because $5 extra was nothing compared for the convenience.
I don't care about that stuff anymore. I mean, my son, he still likes to buy CDs and rip them himself. That's his choice. That's what he likes.
We get lazy when we get older, Jim.
Oh, I know.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you about is, when Apple came out with the Retina display, it was not only the best panel on the market, but the biggest for a while. It took a long time for other companies to get anywhere close to a Retina display. But last week, Verizon launched the Droid DNA, which has, I feel ridiculous even saying it, a 1080p, 1920 by 1080 5-inch screen at a pupil busting 440 pixels per inch. It's almost a pornographic display, but we're getting to the point where they can shove these kinds of components into it. And I wonder, is Apple going to bother increasing their display the next few years? Are they going to go to 3X or 4X? Do they even need to keep sort of a display dominance factor?
Well, I think that Apple will probably increase things or change things based on usability more than specs. I mean, they came out with the Retina display, but I think that people, even for the screens, I think the screen size mattered more, is what I'm trying to say. You have to be able to hold the device and use it.
Yes.
So if you can't do that, then what's the sense of having this 5-inch display? I think people want to be able to use a smartphone in their one hand. I do when I'm walking through an airport or I'm walking and whatever. I want to use it in one hand. I don't want to have to use two hands in order to use it. So Retina display looks pretty good to me the way that it is. Now, I mean, sounds like an incredible display. I haven't seen one up close, but
It's interesting because, I went to a charity event, and I think I mentioned this before, but I went to a charity event a week ago, and in Montreal previously, in years past, it would have been half iPhones, half Blackberries. I saw maybe one Blackberry the entire time. The other half was now not Android devices, but exactly what you said, Galaxy S3s. About half the people had Galaxy S3s there. And because I'm curious, I asked them, and almost every single one of them said that it was cheap and the screen was big. I know, like, to you and I, like, we ask questions about one-handed usability, but I think there's the same people who buy the iPhone 3GS or the iPhone 4 because it's cheaper. Never mind, you spend $3,000 over the course of your contract anyway. I think it's like the TV sets in the showrooms. You go in there and you see that big screen, and for some people, it kind of just overwhelms everything else for them when they purchase.
Yeah, and Freydog on the chat there said that he had no issue using one hand when he tried it with the DNA, and he has no problem with the Samsung 3. So maybe it's not as big of an issue as what I think it is. For me, it would be a big issue, but he says that
I've tried it. You have to. It's different than the iPhone. The iPhone you can hold normally, and your thumb can go pretty much everywhere. With the GS3 and with the HTC One X, which is the precursor to the DNA, you have to sort of let it drop to your lower fingers and then extend your thumb across to use it one-handed. So it's a little bit more dexterous to try to get the thumb over there. At least when I was using it, and I have fairly normal size hands.
Yeah, other people are saying that, like Logan says, that the screen size, like on the Note 2, is why we get so many returns on the device. I can see that. I really can. But, I think that it's going to depend on the individual. I think the main thing about the phones now, as they are, the size that they are, you take the iPhone, you can put that in your hand and, clearly go all over the screen and stuff. I think everybody can pretty much do that. But if you start getting into bigger sizes, then it's going to become more of a personal thing. Where people say, yeah, I can't really hold this because it's so wide, or, because people have different sized hands and they use it in different ways. Some people won't care about having to use two hands at all.
I can also see some people who they want like a digital notepad. They want a tiny Wacom tablet they can carry around with them, and their job is sitting there drawing things all day. And then the Note 2 is sort of the best of it's a hybrid for them.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting a Galaxy Note because you want that bigger screen for when you go to lunch and you sit down and you want to, draw something, or nothing wrong with that at all. That's a personal, individual use case. And you should be able to go out into a store and buy that. You really should. Not everybody is going to like an iPhone. Not everybody is going to like an S3. There should be something a bit bigger. There's maybe something a bit smaller, but there's some choice out there for you.
Logan is saying that more men return the Note than women because they want to put it in their pants pocket and it's too big. And I know Jim has managed to put an iPad mini in his pants pocket, but those of us who wear skinny hipster jeans prefer smaller phones.
That's your own fault for wearing skinny hipster.
Well, you had a picture up on the internet of a iPad mini in your pocket. I'm not outing you here.
No. It was I did because it was a surprise for me because at the event, I think it was Jason Snell that said you can't fit the iPad mini in your back pocket. And I thought, oh, well, okay, you can't do it. So then when I was home, something happened, and I ended up having two things in my hand, and somebody wanted to pass me something else. So I thought, well, here's my chance to try it. So I took the iPad mini and shoved it in my back pocket, and it fit. So there you go.
And because Jim and I live north of the wall, we also have large bearskin coats that we wear all winter, and those it fits nicely in the inside pockets of those too.
clearly. And, my dog sled is faster than anybody else's around here, so I can get away from anybody.
Nice. Sort of the last thing I wanted to get onto was some people, again, they accuse us of being too positive about Apple. And one of the things that we've heard a lot of talk about lately was Apple and their services and internet infrastructure. There's been a lot of stories. iMessage has gone down several times. The App Store and iTunes have gone down. Lauren Brichter released a popular letterpress game, and that brought Game Center, might have brought Game Center down. Google is very good at services. They were born a services company. Amazon was born a services company. Microsoft has been struggling to become a services company for years. Apple has not really publicly discussed their services. But my thinking is it's a lot easier for Google to buy companies like Slide and like Snapseed and Sparrow and just get good apps and good designers than it is for Apple to start building Google or Amazon or Facebook like internet infrastructures.
Well, looking at Apple's services, I think that they're doing a lot better. Now, something that I've become aware of over the past few months is that I use the Apple services a lot, I think, different than what other people do. I don't use Game Center because I'm not much of a gamer anymore. I use Sync a lot, and I rely on Sync a lot, and it works very good for me. I sync simple things though, like contacts, calendars, and these things are very important to the way that I work, because if I add a new contact in my Mac and then I run out, I expect that contact to be on my iPhone immediately. And that works perfectly for me. iTunes Match, I use that exclusively now. And it is beautiful. It works on all of my devices. And I mentioned something about iTunes Match on Twitter the other day. And somebody said, you must be the only one that iTunes Match works for. And I just haven't had any problems. During the beta period, a few, what was it, last year that came out? Well, whenever the beta period was, I used iTunes Match, and it was buggy. There were some things not going right with it, and it was annoying, but it was beta. I didn't say anything about it because it was beta. When it came out, I bought it right away. And I use my main computer downstairs, my Mac Pro that I do all my music recording on, I use for my main storage, because the hard drives and everything are so big. So that's my main storage part. Then on my iPhone, I have access to, however many 10,000 songs or whatever, because it's on iTunes Match.
Yep.
My iPad Mini, same way. My MacBook Pro, same way. Those are all things that I use iTunes Match for all the time. It's not, once in a while. I use it all the time, and it works all the time. So that is good. iMessage, I had people on Twitter maybe 2 weeks ago say, you report on problems with, with Google services or Microsoft or whatever. Why aren't you reporting on Apple's iMessage problems? And I said, what problems? I'm talking on iMessage to somebody right now. What's the problem? And they said, well, it's down. So apparently it was down for everybody but me, because I was you and the person I was talking to, because I was talking to somebody and iMessage was working fine. I did report on it though, because I looked at Apple's site and it said it was down for a certain percentage of people. So, I did do that. It seems in the past little while that they're having more problems with iMessage. And Apple, if they want to be taken seriously, they do have to make this iMessage thing really work. I love iMessage. I love that it's on my phone, and when I go to Europe, I can talk to people in iMessage for free and things like that.
Not get charged $1 a message.
Yeah, and not get charged $1 a message. I think it's time. I love the fact that Apple took a big bite out of carriers, because carriers have been screwing us as customers for a long, long time.
It was apparently the most profitable legitimate business ever designed by man.
Yeah, I mean, it's just craziness.
Yeah.
I love that too. I really do. But yeah, Apple, I think that they have gotten more serious over the years. Now, remember, we've gone from iTools free,
Yes,
paid, to Mac.com,
Yeah.
and then me.com, and now we're into mobile me, and then into iCloud. So we've got six different versions of this. I think it's gotten better all the time in each version. And, it would have been great to have all of these things worked out years ago. But Apple makes, I think the services are easy to use. And most of the time, they're beautiful. They are really nice to work with, and as opposed to Google's, full-time beta of ugliness that they have. But you got to give Google credit. That stuff works.
Yeah, and they are buying these developers and designers to make better looking. Well, like the thing with Google is, I mean, they pivot fast. When they saw the iPhone coming out, they switched from making a BlackBerry and Windows Phone clone to making an iPhone clone. It took other companies 3 or 4 years to make that decision. They saw Siri, and now they have Google Now. And Google Now, they are very good at services. So where Siri is still always online, even if you're doing something local on your phone, like set an alarm, it still has to go to the internet. Where Google Now just does that on your phone. A lot of it is local on the machine, and it's also doing all the predictive stuff now. And it seems like Apple is having to compete now at the things that traditionally they don't do well and their competitors do extremely well. And that's a little bit of a new position for them.
Well, Google, the Google Voice app that they released a while ago was just awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, how could anybody that likes technology take that Google Voice app and say, well, this is crap?
Yeah.
It wasn't.
It was fast.
Fast. That's how Siri should work.
Yeah.
So you can't, I mean, that should be something for people that like saying, well, you're an Apple fan or whatever. No, I'm a fan of technology that works.
Yes.
Technology that allows me to get things done. I hate technology that I have to work on in order to do something. So if Siri isn't as fast or accurate, for that matter, as Google Voice Search, I'll use Google Voice Search. I posted about Google Search and said, this is great. As people are saying in the chat room, I hate Google Docs. That's just stupid. I don't see it.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
I mean, and you've previously said that you quite like the Xbox too. I mean, you're a fan of good technology products.
Xbox is great.
Yeah.
Xbox is my type of games, Xbox has racing games and sports games, and I like hockey and surprise. I like some of that stuff. So Nintendo, no, they don't really have a lot of that stuff. PS3 definitely does. And first-person shooters, too. First-person shooters, I love that. But PS3 has that, but it seems, for me, it went... I had a choice between, the PlayStation and the Xbox when they first came out. And I think the Xbox at that point was supposed to have more games. Mm-hmm. First-person shooters and things like that. So I bought the Xbox. As it turned out, it was a good choice. I like it. So I don't regret that decision at all.
One of the things that was One of the things that was interesting, our fellow Canadian, Guy English, who has made fun of you for wearing Bruins hats in the past, he was talking about something that was really interesting to me because, a lot of people have been wondering about touch on the Mac, and Apple famously said that they don't think it's very ergonomically correct, and don't think it's a good experience to have iOS-like touchscreens on the Mac. So Guy was kind of wondering if it makes more sense when things like actually Lauren Brichter was talking about this too, to have things like Connect, where you don't actually have to touch the screen, where the eyesight camera starts recognizing gestures. So instead of putting fingerprints everywhere, you can do basic gestures a little bit higher than your keyboard, and that starts to add to Siri, and suddenly we have all these natural language interfaces on next generation Macs.
But see, this is the whole thing, and you brought up a good point. Someday we will have technology is moving so quickly that someday could be in 3 years, 5 years. It's not going to be in 20 years. Yeah. There was a time when all of this stuff was so far out in the future, it was sci-fi, and now it's not. So what Apple says, or Microsoft or Google or any company for that matter, what a company says is not feasible today.
Yes.
May be feasible in a very short time. And people tend to come back, especially with Apple, come back and say, but you said it wasn't.
But Steve Jobs said.
So, but things move so quickly these days that it could very well be possible. And are prototypes being worked on? Absolutely. Of course, everybody is working on prototypes of, whatever you can come up with. But the viability of those products doesn't always work right now with the way that things are.
Yeah, Apple's not going to put out a beta product with that on it.
We use products in a certain way. We expect to be able to interact with products in a certain way, which is why Apple spent so much money on education for advertising for the iPhone. Because you now use a phone in a different way.
Yes.
Now you scroll and now you touch, and we have to get used to that. And once we do, then more products come out, like the iPad.
So, Jim, we'll have to continue this discussion next time, but I would like to thank you extremely for coming on the show tonight. Where can people find out more about you?
They can find me on Twitter at jdalrymple and at loopinsight.com.
Nice. And you are, once again, curating the hell out of the Apple universe on that site. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. I appreciate coming on. It's always fun to sit down and chat with you.
And our chat room, thank you guys for being here. You guys make the show a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you, everybody. There was a lot of great comments in there. I loved it.
Keeps us on our toes.
Yeah, it does keep us on our toes. There's a lot of good points in there tonight, too.
Absolutely. And they have a lot of, some of them work in carrier stores. They have a lot of insight into these issues.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, guys. Thank you again, Jim. And we'll be back next week.
Sounds great.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie on Twitter and app.net. You can find all of us at iMore. You can email us at podcast@imore.com, or just leave a comment on the show when it goes live. For all of our shows, check out mobilenations.com/shows. And if you haven't already, check out our new shows. There is Debug with Guy English, where we interview interesting iOS and Mac OS X developers. The first show is already up with Lauren Brichter of Letterpress, and Ad Hoc, which is a home for a sort of an open source podcast that we do on all things geeky. And the first episode of that, The Future of Star Wars, is also already online. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.